Good evening and welcome to the Office of the Prime Minister, where we have a very important address by Prime Minister Andrew Holness. I would like to welcome members of our cabinet. We have, and I will not be able to name all, Deputy Prime Minister Dr. Horace Chang. We have Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries, Colonel Charles Jr., Minister of Foreign Affairs and Trade, Honorable Kamina Johnson-Smith, Honorable Desmond McKenzie, Minister of Local Government and Rural Development, as well as we have other representatives, Minister of Justice, Minister of Education. We have also Minister Mattis Amuda, Minister Floyd Green, the House Leader and Minister of Tourism, the Honorable Edmund Bartlett, Minister of Culture, Gender and Sports, the Honorable Olivia Babsy Grange, as well as Minister of Legal and Constitutional Affairs, the Honorable Marlene Malahou Fort. Thanks to the team here for being here. Also, thanks to the media for being online. We will be allowing brief questions after the short statement by the Prime Minister. I will now welcome the Prime Minister to give his statement, after which I will be back here to take your questions. Prime Minister, sir.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Minister Morgan. Good afternoon, ministers who are here, friends, Jamaicans who are watching us live here in Jamaica and in the diaspora. Good evening. Your government has undertaken some of the most ambitious programs of reform. We undertook far-reaching fiscal and monetary reforms, including work to establish a fiscal commission and an independent central bank. We are modernizing public infrastructure with massive projects in new highways, local roads, water, sewage, and parks. We have undertaken far-reaching reforms in the housing and shelter sector of the economy, leading to more housing solutions coming to market at a faster rate than ever before in Jamaica's history. We are now refocusing our housing efforts to ensure that more affordable housing is available to lower income and lower middle income households in Jamaica. We are undertaking a transformation of our urban spaces by developing purpose-built urban centers to accommodate commerce, production, residences, and recreation. The Bernard Lodge development and the Morant Bay Urban Center are examples. We are modernizing both our laws and infrastructure in transportation. We have put in place the new Road Traffic Act, a new ticketing system, and the procurement of new energy-smart buses, which will begin this year. We have undertaken a seamless capacity building and service-oriented transformation of both the JCF and the JDF in personnel, leadership, doctrine, infrastructure, material and equipment, and technology. We have launched a comprehensive review of the education system to guide its transformation, to align it with national strategic objectives. The Orlando-Patterson report has been completed, and an implementation plan has been developed, and the Education Oversight Committee has been established. So the long process of meaningful and sustainable education reform has begun. We have begun the long talked about reform of our constitutional arrangements. That process is now underway. While I have listed just some of the reforms, the common challenge to all reforms in which we are currently engaged is the implementation deficit in our public sector policy, development, legislative, administrative, and oversight capabilities. The present structure of our public sector bureaucracy just simply cannot efficiently and expeditiously, as quickly as you would want it, deliver and undertake the reforms that I have listed. A decade ago, the greatest constraint on our growth and development as a nation was the poor state of public finances. Today, what do you believe is the greatest challenge? The greatest constraint today on our growth and development is our complicated, incongruous, and demotivated public sector bureaucracy. Having addressed our fiscal affairs, which could be described as the fuel to focus on the engine, the fuel, rather, that finances our reform, it is now time to focus on the engine that actually does the work, that actually moves the reforms forward, and that is the public sector bureaucracy. There are several elements to the public sector public sector reform, which are ongoing at this moment. We are reforming the organizational structure of government. Some entities in government are no longer necessary or duplicate services. Some entities make more logical sense being merged. And as new challenges arise, some entities must be repurposed and new ones formed. Then there is the vexed element of public sector compensation, how we pay our public sector workers. My administration in 2017 decided to take on one of the most comprehensive and transformational reforms of the public bureaucracy since independence, in the form of the Public Sector Compensation Review. It has been talked about for several years, generally agreed to by governments, workers, and unions as being necessary. As our public sector expanded rapidly since independence, our strategic human resource management did not keep pace with its growth to provide commensurate remuneration, attract the best talents, set the highest standards, develop a culture of accountability alongside a culture of innovation and entrepreneurship. Jobs were initially defined and evaluated using a graded description classification system, which is largely subjective and not evenly and universally applied across the public sector. Additionally, there was no universal system of ranking jobs into scales. This created an anomalous situation where comparable jobs were ranked at different scales, which created real and perceived inequities. Another complicating factor was that we had too many different salary scales, 325 different salary scales with 49 bargaining units to negotiate with. The previous mode of compensation was based on a classification system which over time became fragmented, complicated, cumbersome, and unwieldy. This created opportunities for arbitrariness, incoherence, and inequity. This was compounded by the historically weak fiscal position of governments. This meant that we were unable to increase compensation as inflation increased. And therefore, we weren't able to make real adjustment to wages. In effect, what happened was a break between the core value of a job and its compensation. And to compensate for that, a dangerous practice became entrenched. The practice of giving allowances in lieu of genuine increases and adjustments. That became so entrenched that though it was not necessarily in the interest of the workers to be getting allowances, because as you know, allowances do not count for your pension. So in the long term, by getting allowances, you're worse off. But our public sector became used to it and defended it. to the point where for some workers, 60% of income was accounted for by allowances. So there were some attempts, to be fair, in the past to correct the situation. There were some attempts. We recall in the mid-1980s, there was the Administrative Reform Program. None of the adjustments that were done under this reform were comprehensive. It only focused on the administrative and support staff during that period of time. We had other adjustments. In 1995, there was an agreement thereabouts to bring teachers up to 80% of market. There were other attempts in 2002 to bring the central government up to 80% of market. Of course, the agreement for teachers were not fulfilled until somewhere around 2008 that there was some adjustment there. There were also other adjustments which sought to move the health sector to approximate market. But none of the adjustments were ever universally applied. So it was always trying to do the adjustment in the public sector in a piecemeal, a very piecemeal way. We also noticed that after each round of adjustment, we noticed that there was some fiscal stress which led to the implementation of wage freezes. And once that occurred, whatever adjustments that were made in the first place was automatically wiped out. So we have struggled to try and bring the public sector into some coherent structure. And we have attempted it, but it has been piecemeal. In 2015 to 2017, in the 2015 to 2017 contract period between government and the public sector workers, it was agreed that government will undertake a review of the system of compensation to establish relations between and among groups in the public sector and to determine a new compensation philosophy to guide public sector remuneration going forward. In the 2017 to 2021 Heads of Agreement on Wages, it was affirmed that the results of the review will be used to establish equity in the compensation system across the groups in the public sector and between the public sector and the private sector. The Transformation Implementation Group, the TIU, was formed, and Ernst & Young Consulting, an international firm with vast experience in this area, was hired to advise and assist the process. The review was completed in 2021 and is now being implemented in fulfillment of the commitment that was made to establish a new, equitable, and rational philosophy of public sector compensation. Under this new compensation system, the adjustments to be made were comprehensive, meaning that it went right across the board and applicable to all the public sector. It's uniformed, it's logical, it's equitable, and it's transparent. It's easy to understand the structure. We have created a single job evaluation tool to be applied across the public sector. And that is meaningful because before we had several methods of evaluating jobs which partially created the inequities in the system. So that's a major achievement. We did a market survey to establish the level of consultations in the compensation rather in the private sector for comparable jobs. We did an evaluation, an internal evaluation of public sector jobs to develop and to benchmark these jobs against the private sector. And this was done in a very objective, scientific way in fact, in my opinion, this is the most objective and scientific approach we have taken to properly establish job definition, job descriptions, and alignment to roles, responsibilities, and approximate market value. So what we now have is that the public sector compensation system has been simplified. We now have 16 levels or ranks with 16 scales in each rank. So it's a very simple system to use. It is designed for progress within the ranks, and it is designed for comparability across ministries, agencies, departments, and public bodies. So now I want to move on to address pay compensation for members of parliament and ministers and councillors. Pay for ministers and members of parliament has always been a hot potato. Over the last 50 years, 4 committees, all headed by eminent private sector individuals, Leslie Ashenine in 1973, almost 50 years ago, Ronald Sasso in 1981, Douglas Fletcher in 1989, and Oliver Clark in 2003, laid out proposals for treating with parliamentary salaries. Now, in addition, there was a special parliamentary committee, I believe that was chaired by the then Minister of Finance, Omar Davies, in 2005. In each case, some of the recommendations were adopted, some were rejected outright, and others were just ignored. But right across the board, the fundamental changes that were recommended were never implemented. That's just the reality. So I do hear the calls about establishing another committee to, we have done it already. When I hear these suggestions being made, I wonder if people don't do research. It's been done already, and it has come back, and governments haven't implemented it. The truth is that some of the recommendations just couldn't work. Some did make sense, and those that did probably could not be implemented for political reasons. All of them have recommended increases, however. So we are in a position that I would want the country to appreciate that the solutions are not simple ones, right? And that we have to really take some time and analyze the problems. And what I give you is an assurance that this government takes the time to properly analyze, deliberate, and yes, agonize over making these decisions. We don't make them lightly. We don't make them trying to ignore how you feel about your politicians. I want you to appreciate that. So, in this current compensation review, the government directed the Transformation Implementation Unit, the TIU, which is responsible for the compensation review, to evaluate the job of a minister and member of parliament. This was a cabinet decision taken and instructions issued by the cabinet secretary to the TIU. So long before these calls that are emerging about job descriptions for ministers and we, using a systematic, objective, scientific approach, did the job descriptions for MPs and for ministers. Not pulling it out of a hat, not reacting by emotion, but doing it in an instrumental way so that we are objective. And this is the most objective determination that has been done in the 50 years since we have been wrestling with how we should pay our parliamentarians. So, this was done using, as I said, the most recent comprehensive scientific and objective evaluation tool. In other words, the same tool that we developed to assess the jobs of public sector workers, that same tool was used to assess the job of the minister and the member of parliament. And this is, well-established methodology about looking at responsibilities, particularly those who have statutory responsibilities, looking at the skill level that they bring, looking at what the job requires, looking at the time that it requires. There are all kinds of elements and markers in determining how you put together a job description. And we use this tool that we have developed, which is, I think, a very accurate tool in describing and defining the job of a minister, a member of parliament, and indeed all the jobs in the public sector. Now, that job description for a minister, when it was priced, so you do a job, and then you put it now on a scale relative to private sector, what other people within your organization is being paid. So when we priced it, the job of a minister would be at the highest level of the public sector. So remember, we said the public sector now has 16 levels. So the job of a minister would be at level 16. And in terms of scale, it would be at the middle of the scale. So each level has a scale of 16 points. So the job would be at the highest level, level 16, and in the middle of the scale of level 16. That's where the job would fall. There are about 4 or 5 other posts in that area, that rank, that level. I'm not going to disclose those posts, but that's where it would fall. When we decided, all right, how are we going to structure this? Because it would be really much higher than what we pitched it at. We decided that what we would do is to maintain this structure of accountability, which has long been established now for more than 50 years, and it has now become entrenched practice, indeed a convention, that the member of parliament salary should be linked to the permanent secretary's salary. But before I go there, I just wanted to be clear on something, that traditionally, ministers' salaries have never benefited from being on a scale. The minister's salary is just fixed at a level. So public sector workers, permanent secretaries and others, they are in a level, a band, a rank, and then they have points on a scale for which their salary can progress. So if they're at level 15, then a senior permanent secretary may end up at 0.5 or 6 or 7 in the scale. Depending on extra duty, they may end up at somewhere else in the scale. For a minister, no matter how many years you serve, if you run 2 ministries like I do, if you bring more qualifications to the table, it doesn't matter. Your salary is fixed, and that's it. So ministers don't benefit from being on a scale. Once your salary is fixed, that's it. So I wanted to make that point, that once a minister's salary is established, there is no other opportunity for adjustment, unless, of course, there is an overall adjustment of salaries in the public sector or regular wage negotiation increases. So the last time that ministers had an adjustment in salary, a restructuring and an adjustment, was in 2002, 21 years ago, when there was an attempt to move central government to 80% of market. Of course, like now, there was an uproar. And what the Prime Minister of the time did was to appoint the Oliver Clark Committee. And we are back here again today. Anyway, at that time, the adjustment was 103%. Between 2006 and 2008, and by the way, after that increase, there was a wage freeze. I believe there was a wage freeze for 2 years, and then, if I'm not mistaken, another wage freeze again for 2 years. In 2006 to 2008, there was a cumulative increase of 23%, but that was negotiated increases. And since then, we have had wage freezes. I believe the last wage freeze ended in 2015, if I'm not mistaken. Don't hold me to that, but somewhere around there. So there really hasn't been any adjustment except for the adjustments that would have normally taken place in the wage negotiations that have gone on. So in the current adjustment, though the minister's job, as assessed on objective factors such as statutory duties, functions, responsibilities, and time requirements, and that would rank midway, the top level, that is at level 16, ministers' salaries were placed at $52 above the highest point of the scale of the permanent secretary level, which is at level 15. So yes, the salary increases were significant, 200%, and it's a shocking amount. But based upon objective evaluation, it would have been even higher. And we decided to bring it down to what would not compromise the logic of the compensation system. And the logic of the compensation system is that you want to align your compensation with responsibility. That's critical. Critical. Now, are you taking a break? Now, the Clark report, which was commissioned after 2002, recommended delinking the minister permanent secretary adjustment relationship, rather. Now, this was never accepted, and it has continued across administration. The link between permanent secretary and minister, in my opinion, is natural and sensible and should be maintained. Permanent secretaries are directed and they report to ministers. You know, if something goes wrong in the delivery of a public service, no one blames the permanent secretary. No one calls up the permanent secretary. Who gets the call is the minister. There is a false notion that all the minister does is, you know, make speeches and wears a suit. I can tell you that that is not the case. Ministers have statutory duties to apply discretion, to resolve conflicts, to make policy. Ministers, and by the way, the policy-making process is very involved. Ministers have duty to make legislation. They have quite a bit of ceremonial duties that we may look upon as not being necessary or useful, but in the operations of the government, it's necessary and it's useful. Ministers do quite a bit of work with other counterparties overseas, locally. Ministers have to be advocates. They have to champion issues. And indeed, ministers, most of them have constituency work that they have to do as well. So the ministers do quite a bit of administrative work. They do quite a bit of legislative work. They do quite a bit of policy work. They have ceremonial duties. They have constituency duties. And they have international representation duties. So it is a consuming job. And then they have the role and responsibility of resolving disputes, of arbitrating when they have the statutory powers to do so in law. So it is quite an involved process that ministers have to manage. So the point of the link between the permanent secretary and the minister should not be underestimated, devalued, dismissed, or delinked. It is absolutely important that it is maintained. That represents the chain of accountability between the political directorate and the public service. The permanent secretary reports to the minister, is accountable to the minister, and accountable to Parliament. And that is how the cabinet has established in the Constitution as the chief policy-making and executive arm of the government gets things done. So I want to address, because I'm hearing that coming up in the conversation, that there should be a delinking. Now, once we establish that that link is natural and it is sensible to have that link, then we have to also look at how do we maintain the logic, the philosophy of the compensation system, which is to ensure that compensation aligns with responsibility. There was a situation which emerged in the public sector where one rank of workers who reported to a higher rank of workers were being paid more than the higher rank. And it created a problem. And it had to be immediately corrected. So I'm saying that this accountability framework that exists depends on this link, and it depends as well for a seamless alignment and the maintenance of the coherence of the system, that the minister's pay be symbolically more than the permanent secretary's pay. Because at $52, it is a symbolic link. Now, while the focus of the compensation review has been on pay, the terms of reference of the compensation review also directed the TIU to develop a performance-based system and an accountability framework for the entire public sector. In fact, that is already established, and it is on a 2-year implementation plan. So we have heard the question being raised. So why come with the salaries first and not the compensation, the accountability framework and the performance-based system first? These things, the salaries were very contentious, but I guarantee you that to establish an involved system of performance-based pay and an accountability system, that too would also be very contentious. And therefore, it was important to show a sign of good faith that the government would go first with addressing the issues of compensation and then start the involved conversation about how we are going to now, having dealt with the issue of the feeling of underpayment and the demotivation, how do we then bring you along in the public sector to say, all right, for increases to come and how we grow the country, let us agree to a accountability framework and a performance-based system. And so, yes, when we've brought the salaries to the public, we didn't necessarily emphasize this other element of it. However, to be clear, on several occasions, I have given presentations where I have said that now that we have addressed the salary issues, the next phase of the reform must be productivity. I've said that over and over again. Last Labor Day, I gave that speech, and several other occasions, I've given that speech. So the next phase is the productivity phase, which involves a new performance-based system and an accountability system. So I want to assure Jamaicans that we didn't just come with this salary increase to just take a salary increase. And yes, your concerns about accountability, productivity, performance is valid. I share them. I experience it every single day to get things moving. You have heard me say that it would appear that in Jamaica, if it doesn't take long, it's not done well. We have to change that. So nobody needs to tell me about accountability systems and performance-based systems. That is already built into it. Now, for the political directorate, including the parliamentarians and the ministers, the following will be implemented immediately. The written job descriptions for ministers and members of parliament, which we already have in place, those will be tabled in parliament shortly. Those were done in 2021, I believe they were completed. But we'll table those so the public can see what the job entails. A code of ethics to govern the conduct and duties of members of parliament was already developed. There was an existing code of conduct developed under the Patterson administration, and we have enhanced that. No, not just for ministers, but to include members of parliament. The Minister of Justice and the Minister of Legal and Constitutional Reform, they were tasked to do that. They completed that late last year, and they have now submitted that to me. And at the next cabinet, we will review it and turn it over to Parliament for Parliament to review it. They may want to make some adjustments, or they may accept it as it is. And then that code of conduct will be in force. We will institute financial penalties for unexcused absences from sittings of Parliament and committee meetings. And that is a serious measure. So MPs are getting more pay. If they don't turn up, their pay will be docked. That was my recollection was that was when I was sitting on committees maybe 20 years ago. Yes, that was usually done. I'm not certain that practice actually continues, but now we will reinstitute it and make the fines more meaningful. So that will be implemented right away. Each MP will have to provide a written accountability report to Parliament, detailing activities undertaken and highlighting achievements in their constituency. Now, MPs use the state of the constituency debate to do this, but what we will do is set up a more systematic approach to it, and they will actually table their reports, and it will be reviewed by a committee, a specially established committee of Parliament. And the public obviously can review that as well. Now, when I became a member of Parliament, I thought at the time that I knew a lot about government. What you learn in school is not sufficient. It is an entire study in and of itself. And oftentimes, I must confess that I am not totally satisfied with the behavior, which might be informed by lack of knowledge of some of our MPs. I have, through various sources, provided training for our new MPs. 2 cohorts of our backbench have gone through training. But it's a constant training, a constant development of knowledge. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to design special courses of training for members of Parliament, including our senators, and they must complete certain hours, certain number of hours, and become parliamentarily certified in the practice of parliamentary affairs. Now, and this is the first course, I must point out, the first course will be in parliamentary procedures and practices and in our standing orders. Ministers will begin to publish at the beginning of each financial year, starting 2024, the policy, administrative, and legislative priorities, along with targets and performance indicators that they intend to achieve during the fiscal year. This will be in the form of a ministry paper after approval by the Prime Minister. Now, when we make these accountability measures, we have to be cognizant of how they change the nature of our parliamentary government. Cabinet has a fundamental principle of collective responsibility. So the action of one member is the responsibility, technically, of all members. Dividing it up like this will bring individual pressures, and it might change certain dynamics. But I think it is necessary to bring the public to a point where they can have confidence that the cover of collective responsibility is not being taken advantage of, that some ministers are working and others are not. So we have weighed it, and very oftentimes we come up with measures, but when you examine them against our constitutional framework and our parliamentary system, you realize that it could create problems. We have weighed this one, and we have decided that, at this time, it's the best thing to do. So this is a very important measure. We do it internally anyway. Each year before the budget, we go on retreat, and each minister has to declare what their priorities are, and I do monitor and manage. But now I will have the help of the public in monitoring and managing what the ministers commit to do, in addition to what I give as directions to be done. Now, successive administrations have kicked the proverbial can down the road because no one wants to confront the problem. It is left to just re-emerge ever so often. Now, finally, there is an administration that has reviewed the entire compensation structure, developed a fit-for-purpose system, and has begun implementing the system. There are many Jamaicans who understand the bigger picture of having an incentive-compatible system where jobs, as assessed by their responsibility, skills, and time, are paid proximate to market, and where responsibilities align with compensation. Such systems usually attract the best talent and benefit greatly from innovation and productivity. This compensation review is the most objective evaluation that we have had of jobs in the public sector. It is the most objective pegging of jobs proximate to market value that we have had. The process, though objective, has yielded increases for ministers, which, again, though commensurate to their roles and duties, is considered unfair relative to adjustments of other groups. This springs from a historic distrust of the political class and a deep belief that some politicians are only looking out for themselves. Quite apart from the skills and efforts they bring to the job and the responsibilities they bear for which they should be compensated, there is also an expectation that politicians must show solidarity with the suffering of the people. Given the stage of the development of our democracy, these feelings should not be ignored. I pay attention to all the press releases, all the memes. Literally, you know, we do a kind of summary of everything that happens every day, what is being said. And we pay close attention to the mood and the sentiments of the people. As I said before, we are taking on challenges that others have run from. We are doing things that other administrations have only wished they could have done. But more than that, we are taking on so many transformational things all at once. And it is stretching not just the government, but it is also stretching the people. Because not everything that you're doing in terms of transforming the system will have an immediate effect. Not everybody sees, believes, or buys into the vision. So I've learned an important lesson in transformation, particularly in doing the roads. Your progress is not always pardoned. It's just a reality. You have to manage the progress, to minimize dislocation, and to ensure that you bring all the stakeholders along and that all the dissenting views are heard and given a chance. And that even if you feel that you are doing the correct thing, that you're acting as a good steward in the best interest of the country, sometimes you have to take the time to hear, listen, and sometimes I don't like to use the word step back because I don't step back from anything. But you have to sometimes recraft what it is that you're doing. Because at the end of the day, in this accountability framework, I report to you. That's what it comes down to. So, yes, there are those who see the bigger picture. They see that a fit-for-purpose system that we have will attract the best talents. That the compensation system was objective. That the compensation system was logical. That the country is going to benefit from it. But there are those who care less about that and who feel that, you know, this is about politicians looking out for themselves. And then there are those who genuinely feel that politicians have a higher moral duty to act in concert and solidarity with those who are suffering. I am particularly moved by that argument, not by the other argument, because the truth is that, for 50 years we have been dodging, trying to improve compensation, trying to, and we still have the problem. The problem is still with us. Every 10 years or so, we come back to this point where if we had just dealt with it once and for all, the nation would move on. We would, Now, we need an efficient compensation system that aligns compensation with effort and responsibility. Nevertheless, it is important that the country is assured that its leader symbolically and truthfully understands their concerns. As your leader, I do. Therefore, I have directed the Transformation Implementation Unit to remove the Prime Minister's compensation from the new salary scale. The Prime Minister's compensation will therefore remain at its previous levels. To be clear, no retroactive payments will apply to the Prime Minister's pay. I firmly believe that when this new compensation scheme is completed and all anomalies are resolved, coupled with the new performance management and accountability system, which will be implemented, we will see an increase in the motivation and productivity of the public sector, including that of ministers, councillors, and MPs. Jamaica has a unique opportunity at this time to truly set the stage to attract greater talents and skills into the political domain and demand performance from us to earn your confidence. We should not let this opportunity pass only to be confronted by it in the near future. I ask for your understanding and support. I want to now turn to the Cabinet. The Cabinet has been reduced by one ministry. And I have added a new Cabinet Minister to focus on skills and digital transformation. Let me run through the Office of the Cabinet. That's yours truly, Andrew Holness, Prime Minister. Office of the Prime Minister, yours truly, Andrew Holness, and I will be supported there by the Honourable Robert Nestor Morgan, MP, Minister without portfolio, but he will continue to handle the information portfolio and other such areas as I may assign to him from time to time. I'm very pleased to welcome Senator, Dr. the Honourable Dana Morris Dixon. Of course, I'm giving you the title before you're sworn in, but when you're sworn in, the title will become official. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to the Cabinet as Minister without portfolio. And Dana will be responsible for skills and digital transformation. These are two areas that require particular skill sets. And I don't want to delve too much. I'll have another briefing on that. But it is important to be able to attract people into government who are not necessarily coming from a political background, that come with a political skill set, because to move government, you need to have people also with technical skill sets who can look at the issue through an executive and policy lens. And that is why I'm so happy and so grateful that Dana has seen it possible to serve our country in this regard. And there are two areas, as I've said. One is in skills. The private sector is crying, literally, regarding the availability of skilled labor. It is now becoming a constraint on our growth. And so we need to pay attention to that, and that will be Dana's role, to collaborate with the private sector and HEART to make sure that there is this tight alignment so that we are training people to be job ready, not just for the skills of the past, but more so the skills of the future that will drive growth in our economy. And the other is digital transformation. The National Identification System, it's well on its way, and there are many other digitalization programs within government that is ongoing, and Dana will supervise that. Dana is coming from the banking sector, and it's very important to have that link to drive digitalization, particularly as it relates to the government and the financial sectors. Now, Homer Davis, MP, will continue in the office of the Prime Minister as Minister of State, and he will take up responsibility for some of the other areas in OPM. Those will be published, but particularly for the social partnership, because the social partnership is such an important arm of our democratic structure. Now, the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation, I will remain the minister there. The Honourable Everard Warmington will continue to be the minister without portfolio, managing the works portfolio. And Senator, the Honourable Matthew Samuda, will continue to do the excellent job he's doing in managing the climate change, environment, water, and other areas for which I have given him responsibility. The Ministry of National Security, Deputy Prime Minister, the Honourable Dr. Horace Chang, will remain as Minister. There is much talk about the Ministry of National Security. Minister knows that we have had our heart-to-heart talk about the ministry. It is a tough and thankless job. It is not a ministry that any other minister wants to go. But you know what? We have been making instrumental and steady strides in transforming our security forces so that eventually we will have the capacity to address the level of crime and push it down, that level of crime that we have. And it is working. I was so very impressed to see the commissioner put on the expo of the JCF, really showing incredible talent. And we're building. The public has to understand that for decades we underinvested in national security. For decades we treated national security in an unsophisticated way. Now we are only now just getting up to speed. So I'm confident that we will have a breakthrough in that regard. I'm going to attach to Minister Chang a new Minister of State, the Honourable Juliet Cuthbert-Flynn, and she will be the Minister of State in that ministry. And there is a strategy change that will become apparent. I had mentioned in my budget presentation that we have to start to emphasize a little bit more on violence prevention and social intervention, and we need that kind of personality to push that area. So I'm putting the very energetic Juliet Cuthbert-Flynn in that area to support Minister Chang. I have a new ministry the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Mining. And I'm appointing the Honourable Floyd Green, MP, as Minister in that ministry. Agriculture has such great potential, and mining fits neatly with it as well. And you would have had some experience in that regard as well, Minister Green. So I'm entrusting you with that very important ministry. The Honourable Franklin Witter will continue to be Minister of State in that ministry. The Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Sports, otherwise the Ministry of Minister Grange, Babs's ministry. So we'll leave it at that. The Ministry of Education, again, another ministry that, you know, I've noted very carefully the observations and suggestions and criticisms. We have in train a program which I do not want to disrupt. Minister Favour Williams has been integral in establishing the transformation program. And Minister Williams will therefore remain as the Minister of Education and Youth. She will be joined by the Honourable Marsha Smith, MP. And the focus of that will be to look at child services in that ministry that needs significant attention. You know, I'm very concerned about some of what is happening with our children, particularly our children in state care. So Minister Williams will be supported by Minister Marsha Smith. In terms of the Ministry of Finance, Dr. Nigel Clark will remain the Minister of Finance, and he will be joined by the Honourable Xavier Main as Minister of State in the Ministry of Finance. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Senator the Honourable Kamina Johnson-Smith, and you know, Minister Johnson-Smith has just stamped that ministry. But there are also some critical matters that are ongoing in that ministry, which require, you know, we could not have a break in those things, you know. Some very critical things, including regional matters that we have to pay close attention to. The Honourable Alonda Terrilong MP will be Minister of State in that ministry, special focus on diaspora affairs and whatever else Minister Johnson-Smith may want to assign him. The Ministry of Health, again, Dr. the Honourable Christopher Tufton has stamped his name on that ministry. Again, in our discussions, you know, Minister Tufton has done so well nationally. And in my discussions with him, he pointed out that the best is yet to come. The infrastructure in health, the improvement that he has championed, and he would like to see that through. And I am aware of it. And again, you would not want to have a break in the implementation of those. So Minister Tufton will remain in the Ministry of Health and Wellness. In the Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce, Senator Aubin Hill will remain. In the Ministry of Justice, the Honourable Delroy Chok will remain. Now, the Ministry of Legal and Constitutional Affairs. Now, when Minister Ford got this ministry, I'm certain that she did not realize the level of work that constitutional reform would require. And so Minister Malahoo Fort has been entrusted with carrying through this very important national agenda item. And so she will continue in the ministry, but with a sole focus almost on ensuring that we achieve the constitutional reform agenda. The Ministry of Local Government and Community Development, the Honourable Desmond Mayor Mackenzie will continue as Minister. We have a new ministry, the Ministry of Science, Energy, Telecommunications and Transport. And this fits neatly together. And the Honourable Darrell Vaz MP will remain as Minister. there. And the Honorable J.C. Hutchinson will give support as Minister of State. Now, I wondered what to do with the Ministry of Tourism. Because Minister Bartlett has done such an amazing job. It is not quite well understood how that ministry works, but it is a salesman's ministry, and you have to be in the field, talking to the agents, meeting the investors, in addition to managing tourism on the ground in Jamaica. And Minister Bartlett has done a fantastic job, and he remains as Minister of Tourism. In the Ministry of Labour and Social Security, I have asked the Honourable Pernell Charles Jr. to take over that ministry. Labour and Social Security will require significant transformations. So one of the other transformations that I did mention in the earlier part of my presentation, which we will have to undertake, is a transformation of the PATH program. And so I'm specifically saying that as you are appointed, this is something that you will have to take on. Of course, it is not something that you can take on alone. It has to be done with the Ministry of Finance. But most importantly, it is the digitalization of our welfare, social welfare and conditional transfer services. So you will be working closely with my office, with our new Minister of Skills and Digital Transformation, Dr. Morris. And you will be supported by the Honourable Norman Dunn, MP, Minister of State. So we have, in hearing the call of the people for accountability, for stability, for good management, we have carved down the government, we have taken off one ministry, and we have kept the government basically very tight, and we have brought in new talent into the government. At this juncture, I want to take the opportunity to thank Minister Carl Samuda, former minister. Carl sent in his retirement note to me. We had a long talk, and I want to publicly acknowledge the contribution of Carl Samuda to national life, to politics. Carl has been in politics for over 40 years. And I want to thank him for his graciousness, and he has given us the assurance that his very deep talent and skills are still available to coach the younger ones and to the government as we look forward to the future. I also want to thank Audley Manayard Shaw for his contribution, his graciousness, for his service to the nation. We will never forget his infectious smile and his more infectious laugh, his humor, the wonderful human being that Audley is. We have had very deep discussions as to what the future could hold for Audley. And so, who knows? You may hear something else regarding Manayard in the future. So with those updates, I want to thank you for listening to my very long presentation, but I thought it was necessary to bring the nation into my thoughts and to ask for your support and understanding.
Much, Prime Minister. I will now open the floor for questions. I will take one question each from each media house. You may indicate by using the raised hand feature. Our first reporter is Edmund Campbell. I suspect Edmund is from the Gleaner Company. Mr. Campbell, you may go ahead with your question, please. I'm not hearing Edmund.
Good evening, Mr. Morgan. Good evening, Mr. Prime
Edmund.
Minister. Are you hearing me?
Yes, we're hearing you. Go ahead, please. Go ahead.
All right. Mr. Prime Minister, you've spoken to a number of issues of the accountability framework, codes of conduct, and so on. My question to you, Mr. Prime Minister, the certification of your 2021 statutory declaration it is yet to be done. The commission, in a tweet, said that the Integrity Commission, that is, said it is not in a position to certify your statutory declaration, and in the circumstances will be unable to comment any further on the issue. In the interest of public interest, Mr. Prime Minister, could you provide us with a response as to why your statutory declaration at this time, for some time, now has not been published or gazetted?
It is also of a concern to me. I'm not aware of the reasons. I have been written to with a letter basically with the same content of the tweet. So I am not in a position to say what the issue of the Integrity Commission is. However, just to be clear, the Integrity Commission has a duty to thoroughly investigate and ensure that whatever is presented to them is verified and validated. So I suspect that they are in that process, and I can only await the completion of that process.
Thank you very much, Edmund. I see the next person who wishes to ask a question. I think that is Ms. Janela Precious from TVJ. Ms. Precious? I can't hear Janela.
Thank you, Robert.
Yes.
Good evening, everyone. Prime Minister, how long do you intend to forego your salary? And have you considered
One question, Janela. Thank you very much.
But I just want to include this
one.
How do you, Mr. Holness, see the political consequences? Are you prepared to face the political consequences of this decision?
I'm sorry, I'll be asking the Prime Minister to answer one question. Thank you very much.
Well, he can choose which one he wants to.
Well, you know, I've always said, when you hold this job, you must be prepared to face the political consequences of your decision. That's democracy. And I always have and continue to put myself at the mercy of the people who elected me. I work for them. I am not their master, so I take into consideration what their views are. At the same time, they have elected me to make the best decisions on their behalf. So I have to conduct myself as a good steward, and I have to be honest. And so I honestly believe that this measure of the compensation review is in the best interest of the country. It will lead to the attraction of greater and better talent. It will increase the competition for the spaces in government. It will increase the creativity, the productivity, the ingenuity, the entrepreneurship of the executive of the country. It will, in the long run, yield the results. As to whether or not people believe that, again, I put myself at the mercy and discretion of the people of Jamaica.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. I think we have a question from Mr. Arthur Hall from the Jamaica Observer. Mr. Hall.
Good afternoon, Minister. Good afternoon, Prime Minister, and the ministers in the audience. Prime Minister, I'm just checking. You said you will not accept the salary increase, but does that mean your other ministers will be paid higher than you based on the new compensation package? And how do you respond to that?
Yeah, so effectively what it means is that I would have withdrawn the Prime Minister's salary from the consideration of the compensation scheme as it has been declared. So yes, the ministers will continue, and I encourage them to continue to take the salary because I genuinely believe that it will improve governance in the country. But you would bear with me when I say that I have to keep the country together. And there are those persons in the country who genuinely believe that the leader of the country must show solidarity with those who are suffering. I genuinely believe that too. Some people might say it is symbolic. Yes, symbols are important, but I'm doing it because I genuinely also believe that I have to keep faith with those persons who are losing faith, who are looking on and say, you see how them get and me no get. Because that is a real sentiment that as a leader of the country, ministers don't carry that burden, I carry that burden. That as leader of the country, I have to make sure that they know that there is someone who looks out for their best interests, including being able to put aside any benefits that may accrue to their office, that they themselves don't get that accrued benefit. So it's very important that that be done. It is the demonstration of the good stewardship and good servant leadership.
Prime Minister, it appears that was our last question. I want to thank you for your presentation. I want to also thank members of the media who have participated in this press conference, and also our cabinet ministers and our support staff from PBCJ, JIS, and the Office of the Prime Minister. Once again, thank you very much. We apologize for the late start as we had some matters to settle, and we thank you for being patient with us. Until next time, Post-Cab is Wednesday at 8 a.m. sharp. We're always on time. Thank you very much for joining us. Have a wonderful day.